So this afternoon, we're going to welcome Sarah back again, and as we said this morning, she's going to talk through. So you heard about the programme, you're going to experience part of it this afternoon. So this is actually a programme that they do with parents in Dorset, and there's a better term of your trusts there, but in that area for parents whose children are struggling with anxiety. So I'm not going to go on any further, and I'll hand you over to Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you. So as Anya says, this is actually a workshop that we devised because the school said, we've got parents of young people who've got anxiety. Can you come and do us something? So this is part of our universal offer. So a bit like we do for whole classes, this is for any parent who wants to come. So it can be a parent of a child who's got diagnosed anxiety or not. So it's not, it's just a one-off workshop. If we wanted to then go on and parents can then refer themselves in for a slightly longer programme, we then do a kind of 6-week parent anxiety programme, which kind of very much goes into a lot more detail than this. So this is very much just an overview about what anxiety is that we do deliver as part of our wider offer to parents of primary school pupils. Okay, so first of all, what is anxiety? Anxiety is normal. We've already talked about this morning. We all feel anxiety some of the time, and actually anxiety is a really good thing because it helps prepare ourselves for danger and it helps us get things done. This morning, I'm bricking it, to be perfectly honest. I haven't done presenting in front of people, like real people, for nearly 3.5 years, apart from very small groups. So naturally, I'm feeling anxious. That doesn't mean I've got a mental health problem. That actually means I'm preparing myself. My body is preparing. I've got the sweaty hands. I've got those sensations, those feelings that are actually perfectly normal. And I think when we're working with children and thinking about our own children, it's about recognising that actually butterflies in your tummy are a thing, sweaty hands are a thing, feeling a little bit like you've got a lump in your throat, feeling a little bit sick. Those are okay. And actually, what we know about anxiety is if you continue to live with it and to roll with it, it will decrease again. So in a few minutes, I'll probably you feel that big bit of your breath coming out. But what we also know is that too much anxiety just means that you can't think properly. It stops you being able to access that bit of your brain that does the thinking, that bit of the rational thinking brain that kind of makes you go, actually, it's going to be okay. Your brain is so over-exaggerating and so overplaying what's going to happen. Our brains are thinking back to caveman times. We're thinking in our sort of limbic system, which is our caveman brain. Our brain's still telling us that there's a saber-toothed tiger 2 doors down that's going to come out and jump at us. What it isn't telling us is that actually that's probably just crossing the road in a big lorry. But our brain is still in that real fight-flight mode. And actually, if we've got too much anxiety, we're not going to be able to function, and neither are our children. So what are the causes? Anxiety can be caused by a host of things. Some of it is genetic. Some of it can be learnt. If we live in a family where you've got an anxious parent or an anxious grandparent, children learn, children model on us. They model what we do. So if prime example, snakes. My mum is absolutely petrified of snakes. I'm not a big fan either. No reason to be, only because my mum freaks out every time she sees one on telly, let alone if we ever see one in the real life. She's up around my dad's neck, But actually that anxiety can be learnt, So learning from other people's reactions. If we see somebody fall over, what do? Do we panic or do we stay calm? So thinking about how we react to situations. If we kind of go in all jazz hands, our young people and our children are going to also pick that up. If we go in calm and say, do you know what? Let's think about this. Let's rationalise it. Let's, take a big deep breath, and then we'll deal with it. Anxiety can affect us, our children in many ways. It can affect us in our family lives. So our social lives, school life and education, and our mood, Anxiety can affect how we feel. Talked a little bit earlier about those children at that early stages who are like your limpets that, literally peel them off at the school gate. They have to be handed over or somebody has to come and get them. They're crying, they're impacting. That, for you as parents, is really difficult to manage. That child is then seeing your anxiety about leaving them and stressing. And I think, COVID has played a big part in that. As I said earlier, we've had a lot of young people who've really struggled to go back into school. And that's not just primary age, that's kind of up into secondary as well. Because they're anxious about what's it going to be like wearing masks in school? Not that that's a thing anymore, but it was initially. What if I catch COVID? What if I bring it home? What are my friends going to say? What if my best friend doesn't like me? I've not seen them for however long because I've been stuck at home isolating. What if we've changed? What if my friend's made a new friend online? All of those things are going to be playing in that child's mind. And those, all of those things that for us as adults, as I said earlier, we can rationalise and go, actually, the reality of that, likelihood of that happening is probably not that high. But for a child, they live in the moment. They live in the here and now. They live and are impacting on that side. So we've got different types of anxiety. We've got generalised anxiety, which is just kind of that feeling of on edge and unease that happens all of the time. Social anxiety, which is where children and young people might then struggle, in large crowds, large groups. You've got the children who you might take, to a Christmas market or something, where it's really busy. There's lots of noise, there's lots of crowds, there's lots of people, unpredictable, unsure. And they will literally be like, don't want to go, too busy, can't cope. Those sorts of things. And the separation anxiety, and that's one we work with a lot, I think, and is one that you guys probably see more often than not with your children, particularly around school and wanting to leave you at the school gates. And quite sometimes when we work with families and we work with the parents, we find out that there's been things that have happened at home and the child doesn't want to leave you because they're worried about what's going to happen at home. So it could be anything from, mum's been in hospital previously, the child doesn't really understand why, but mum's not been around. So they're worried that if they come home, mum's not going to be at home anymore because she'll have been carted off to hospital. Or, anything like that can cause that. I think phobias is a sort of fairly obvious anxiety. Talked about snakes. Not a big fan of spiders either, to be honest. But actually, phobias are a really big thing for young people. We get quite a lot of referrals for children scared of dogs. So quite often we get school refusing children. And actually what they've got is a phobia of dogs and they're terrified that they're going to walk into a dog on the way to school in the morning. Because actually people take their dogs to the school gates. So not only have you got the dogs to contend with, you've also got the fear of panic and crowds and other people and all of that unknown. So that child's not going to want to leave the house. So again, you can sort of see how all of these things can then start building up and impacting on your day-to-day life. And then, of course, they're then in school, fine in school, coming towards school time, they're then starting to panic about, well, I've got to go home again now. I've got to walk past that park. There's going to be loose dogs running around there because the owners will let them off and play ball. I don't know what they're like, And then, of course, the child's then holding it together, gets home, and then you get the outbursts. And you get the big kind of, I can't cope, it's all terrible, I don't want to be here anymore. But actually, what's happened is all throughout the day, little things have built up and built up. Don't know if you've heard the analogy of the big cup. So actually, you've only got a cup of a certain size. And it's fairly full most of the time, just with our day-to-day life. And this will apply to you as adults. But actually, you think about it, if we get up, we're a bit late, our alarm doesn't go off. That's another thing that stresses you out. Go to work, there's a road's closed, so I've got to go a different way. That's another thing that fills your cup. So every time something happens, your cup gets fuller and fuller and fuller until it just overflows. And then you come home, some of us will go to the gym and take it out in the gym, go for a walk. Some people will probably just zone out and go and just sit in a quiet space and just say, I can't talk to anyone for half an hour. And then I'll come back. Some people might go, I need to go and have a coffee before you can even talk to me. So as adults, we have coping strategies. Children often don't, and we need to be there to teach them how to cope and do those skills better. And OCD is another form of anxiety, and I think people a lot of time think about the germs and the cleaning, but actually it can be things around making sure people are in the right place at the right time, objects are where they should be, checking things. Particularly if there's been, quite often we get young people referred with low-level OCD, and it's because there's been a burglary in the street, or something's happened, or there's been, some knife crime, or somebody's been whatever. I think, saying to somebody earlier on, South West has this persona of being this lovely, really nice place, but actually we've got high levels of crime, deprivation, drug and alcohol particularly drug substance misuse, gang kind of stuff. So these kids are then fearing all of those things. So what they'll do is they'll check, are the doors locked? Because 2 doors down, that was why the burglar got in, because they forgot to lock their back door. or they've had a fire, or the gas hob's off. So they start checking. But actually, when you start unpicking it, it stems from something that's a reality. But the brain has then exacerbated it into this huge, big, major issue. So actually what we do is we peel it back and work back to that cause and that trigger. Because actually, if you just focus on the symptom, you're not treating the cause. And I think that's something that, we need to be looking at and mindful of. So we talk about anxiety maintenance and what children do to avoid having anxiety or to avoid those sensations is they'll do one of three things. So the first is they'll avoid it. So those are your kids who aren't going to go out the house. They're the children who would rather hide under the duvet, probably tell you to, get lost in not so polite terms. They're going to be really stubborn. And you'll hear yourself going, God, why are they so stubborn? They just don't want to do what I want them to do. They're really argumentative. They're really pushing back on me. They're not respecting my boundary. All of those things. But actually what it could be is they're just avoiding the situation that's making them anxious. You'll also get the children who seek reassurance, who are constantly, is it all right, Mum? Can I do this? Well, I've already said it's okay. Yeah, but can I? I just need to double check. Can I do this? Is that okay? Have I done it right? And what they're doing is they're seeking you to tell them that it's okay because their internal systems aren't doing it themselves. And then you have the children who do what we call safety behaviours. So they're the ones who will kind of carry their blankets around with them a lot because it's something that keeps them safe or is recognised. They might have, pick at their jumpers and things like that because actually anything like that can make them feel safe and secure. I've got, children in their secondary school who still carry a bit of their childhood blanket in their blazer pocket and they'll walk around and their parents have actually sewn it onto the inside of their pocket so they don't lose it. So that actually if they are feeling anxious, they can just put their hand in their pocket. They know that their reassurance is there and their safety net is where it should be. So this is an example of an avoidance cycle. So child feels uncomfortable and stupid in a classroom. So they've got low self-confidence, they feel that they're a bit rubbish. So when the teacher says, I've got a question for you, can somebody put their hand up and answer it? That child's not going to put their hand up. Because what they're going to do is they're worried that people will think they're stupid. They'll feel judged, they'll feel worried about their peers. So then they don't get the help that they need from their teacher because they haven't asked for it. Which then makes them feel really anxious again because they're feeling like they don't know what's going on. Which then makes them feel incompetent and not very confident, which then makes them feel sick. And then they get all clammy, and then they feel even worse. So then they're not going to put their hand up the next time. And so this cycle goes on and on. So one of the things that we need to do, and we'll do some strategies around a bit later, is about breaking that cycle. So at any one of these points, we can intervene and do something. Example of a reassurance cycle that you might find. So suddenly worried that mum's house keys have gone missing. So in their head, they're thinking, well, the keys are missing. How are we going to get back home? My pet's inside. How am I going to open the door? We're going to be stuck outside the house forever. We're then going to have to break the window. Breaking a window means that mum's going to have to pay for a window. How are we going to afford that? So then they become sweaty, hot, panicky. And then the next time, what they'll do is they'll repeatedly check mum's pocket. Have you got the keys in your bag, mum? Are they still there? Where are the keys? And then you're kind of like, I've told you the keys are in the pocket. Yeah, but I need to see them. And almost that seeing them isn't going to be enough to change that cycle. So again, you can see how these cycles perpetuate and keep going. And again, example of a safety cycle, and this is one we had with a 5-year-old. Mum says, can you nip upstairs and get your jumper? The kid had a nightmare the night before. Thought a monster was in the cupboard. Well, the monster's going to get me. So then the child sort of was like, I just feel really sick, feel really shaky, my legs won't work. So what he then started to do was only go upstairs when the brother was there, upstairs, because he felt the brother was going to be safe and keeping the monster locked away. So then it just sort of got into this cycle where he then wouldn't go upstairs for anything unless somebody else was upstairs. So again, it's that kind of reassurance and safety of having something else there. So what can we do? And I think I've got 4 comments up here. And one of them's what we would say is helpful reassurance, one is unhelpful, one is normalising, and one is validating. So a helpful comment is, do you know what, I can see this is really hard for you. Whereas an unhelpful reassurance comment is, well, I think you can do it. Because actually that child, you're not saying, when you're saying a helpful comment, saying, I can see it's really hard, you're saying that you're able to put yourself in that child's position and say, actually, do you know what, it is really scary and tough. Whereas if you say, well, I think you can do it, it might sound like it's helpful, but actually to that child, what they're hearing is, my mum's not listening to me. My dad isn't really understanding why I'm struggling so much. So although it feels like a helpful comment, actually it's that slightly unhelpful kind of connotation for the young person. Normalising, again, is something that I think most of us probably do normally. So, go on, have a go. You've done it before. It went really well. What are you worried about? Why do you think it's not going to go well again? Because actually the last time you tried it, it was really hard, but you succeeded. So again, you're just giving them that different, sort of slightly different sort of slant on how you're putting it. And then validating. This is about saying, actually, I think you should see how it goes. I feel confident in you. So you're owning that feeling. You're not saying it's the child that's feeling confident. You're saying, I feel confident in you. So actually you're showing that you believe in that child and your child. And actually, if it doesn't go well, then we'll work on it. We'll come up with a better solution. We'll think about that. And that's a really helpful thing if you're teaching in classrooms as well as at home. Because actually a lot of children won't put themselves forward because they're afraid of what could go wrong. But actually by telling them that it's okay if it doesn't go wrong, we'll be able to kind of fix it afterwards and we'll work out a better way. It kind of gives them that confidence. And I think, we were talking about it earlier, about that needing to give our children confidence and give them opportunities to try for things to go wrong. Because actually, if things don't go wrong, how do we learn? So actually, it's about finding ways of communicating with your child, as opposed to saying, just get on with it, you'll be fine. That comes across in a very different way to a child who's struggling with their anxiety. So again, things that we can do ourselves is about modelling good coping strategies. So we can respond but not react. So, if I'm out with my niece and we come across a pond and there did happen, there was a grass snake in it, and I was kind of thinking, okay, this is not great, but I've got my 4-year-old niece with me, and I'm thinking, if I show her that I'm scared, she's going to pick up on that and then think that this is a really bad thing. So actually, I kind of owned my own feelings and went, right, okay, come on, Sarah, big deep breaths inside. Let's do some of these things. What do I teach everyone else to do? Let's put it into practice. And actually, we managed to, we just said, we won't stop here for too long because there's actually a really nice bit around the corner that we can go to. But rather than making a big deal of, oh my God, there's a snake, I can't cope, and freaking out, we just kind of navigated it in a slightly different way. So again, it was that, how do I respond but not react? We're going to go through some breathing and grounding techniques. Breathing sounds really simple. We all breathe, we're here. But actually one of the quickest ways to regulate ourselves when we're anxious is to do deep breathing and to practice some breathing techniques. And I've got a few different ones. I think there's lots that involve counting, and if you go on Google and Google things, there's loads on there. But actually what I found, and kind of from experience, is the counting ones don't always work because people are anxious about whether they've counted to the right number or not. So actually some of the strategies that I'll show you later are ones that don't involve that level of thinking, because if you're anxious, you can't function, and that part of your frontal cortex of your brain doesn't work. There's no point. So let's think about some strategies that are going to work in the heat of the moment. Because actually you can do the other stuff when you're in a better place, when your children are in a better place. But if you're in the heat of that moment, you need things that are going to work there and then that don't involve overly thinking. Self-talk. It sounds really silly and it can feel a bit awkward sometimes, but we all do self-talk. We all go, internally we're kind of going, right, okay, you can do this. You have that internal monologue. So actually teaching children to kind of go, I can do this. I've got this, and giving them the kind of mantras and things before they go into a situation can be really helpful. And positive reinforcement to encourage bravery. We want our kids to be brave. We want our kids to go out there and face the anxious situations. We want them to be able to succeed. So actually, sometimes, I'm not going to say bribes, because that sounds terrible, but sometimes you do need, if it's a particularly challenging situation, even if it's like a reward chart with a sticker or something that child really likes, if we go into town where it's really busy, once we've done the Christmas shopping or, we've walked through the fair, then we can have an ice cream. Something as simple as that for a kid, it hits their reward system. Kids are reward driven. We can't get away from that. They love it. So it could be as simple as, when you get home, putting a bead into a jar, and when you get like 50 beads in your jar, you can have another something or a toy, or, so you can build those things to work towards. But actually all of those things are going to help our children manage their anxiety better, and actually are modelling that it's not okay to be anxious, because actually it is. Sometimes we need to be anxious, but it's about how do we manage it in the heat of the moment. So, as I say, we've talked a little bit about the kind of good coping strategies, and those are things that we need to model as adults to our children. Children aren't taught. It's not innate to them to know how to do that. For some, a lot of children will just pick things up naturally. They'll see people responding, but children who are potentially on the autistic spectrum or have additional needs need to be explicitly taught how to manage situations, because in their world, it's outside of their norms. So actually, by modelling and showing and practicing those things, children are quite often visual learners. There's a saying, isn't it? Monkey see, monkey do. And actually, that's what we need to be doing. So another thing that we kind of encourage parents to do that's quite a simple strategy in the evenings is a worry time or a worry box. And that's a set time that is allocated to allow children to talk about their worries. So it's not the time when they come straight in from school, when they're all overwhelmed, etc. And it's not something that you do right before bed, because otherwise they'll worry about what they're worrying about. But what you can do is get them to, if they're old enough to be able to write down their worries, you can create a worry box. Works really well for kind of 8, 9-year-olds. If you're doing younger, worry time is fine. And that's a time where you can sit with the child and just talk through some of the things that have upset them during the day or that they're worried about. And it gives them permission to say, actually, do you know what? This bit was a bit scary today. And it's, you'll know your children and what language to use and how to put that. But it allows them then to kind of draw a line under that, because it's not in the here and now. And then they can carry on. And the reason we say we don't do it before bed is because you're going to be trying to do all of that calming stuff before bed. And if they've just talked about the things that are worrying them, they might still be thinking about them. So we sort of tend to say, 15 minutes before tea, because then once you've talked about your worries for the day, you've then got the distraction of food. And that tends to kind of distract them off, and then they're off again. And then you can do kind of your nighttime routines or whatever happens after your tea time. So with the older ones, we get them to create a worry box and get the child to own it. Get them to decorate it. It's a really good bonding exercise for you guys as parents to do with children, because actually you can get stickers, glue, paint, and create monsters or whatever. And I'll show you an example of a really great one in a minute. But as things happen, get them to write them down. Or if you as a parent are noticing when your child's anxious, you can jot it down, because then it gives you that chance later on for a set time to talk them through. And once the worry is put away, then it's safe. It's not, they can't worry about it anymore, because it's in the box and we'll discuss it. So as I say, we set a time. And then you just sit and talk through, and you open up the worries, or you open up the things that you've noticed, and sort of say, I noticed you seemed a bit worried when you came in from school. Had something happened today? And actually opening up those conversations with our children helps them normalise that actually worries are okay. And you as parents can put some worries you've had in, so actually you can do it jointly, because actually they will then see that you have worries, and actually that's okay too, because just because they're children doesn't mean they're not going to have worries as an adult. But I think there's always that, well, it's a child thing. Actually, it's an everybody's thing. We all have worries. You know, for example, I'm worrying already about tomorrow in Dublin Airport and the queues, whether that's going to be the case or not, having got delayed for 2.5 hours yesterday. So, you know, my worries are already, you know, they're valid worries. They're things that are okay to be worried about. But children will have different worries to us. But if we can share our worries and say, actually, do you know what? These are a thing. It's okay. And actually, if we share, then we can help work through that. And again, that's that role modelling and sort of that positive behaviour. So this is a great example. Basically, it's an old tissue box. And the kids painted it, stuck some glue, made some teeth, and just putting the stuff in. You can do anything. I mean, this is a great example. Sadly, not one of our kids found this one on Google. But it just gives you a great idea of how creative you can be. Some people have just, you know, chucked glitter over everything, you know. Suggest doing that one outside rather than in an office, as we discovered once. I found glitter for about 3 weeks afterwards. But then it becomes the child. They own it. It becomes their thing. It's not, you know, you're working collaboratively. You're working jointly together. It's not an us versus them scenario. Because actually you could all just, you know, the whole family could chuck it in and we could have family worry time. Because actually, you know, it could be that the child's worried about something their sibling's done. And actually, if you know that that's a problem, you can then deal with it there and then rather than let it fester. So, you know, there's lots of things you can do. Another way, this is more probably if they're a bit older or, you know, it just gives you a bit of a prompt. I don't know if you can read it all. But find out what the problem is. So get them to describe it. Tell them that you can see that they're worried about it and that there is a problem that you can solve and that you can do it together. So questions might be, you know, is something bothering you? You seem to be a little bit quieter today. Or what is it with the older ones, what is it in this situation that you're most worried about? Get them to unpick it. Because then what you can do is you can list all of the solutions. And the great thing about this is that there's no right or wrong. So every idea needs to be considered, whether it be completely ridiculous or not. So it would be, what would somebody else do in this situation? What happened before, and can you remember what helped? So when I've done this before, one of the solutions the child came up with was, let's go to Disneyland. Yeah, that's not going to be a possible solution right now, but it's good to know where the kids are thinking, because actually the impractical stuff and the practical things, you can kind of, as parents, you can kind of turn it around and sort of say, well, we obviously can't go to Disneyland, but we might be able to go to the park. Not quite the same, but you kind of get my drift. And then you get them to think about what would happen if they chose that solution. So what would happen if we did that now? What would be different? And then what would happen in an hour or so or tomorrow if we did that? How would that make you feel? And I think, again, get them to think about how practical it is. Disneyland, not practical. But going to the park, swings, whatever, slightly more practical. And if the children are then working through this, get them to think about whether it's doable. Can we do this? Yes or no? And then get them to think about how good is the outcome. Is it going to be, for each of the scenarios you've thought about, you do all of this with. So, how good is the outcome? Would it work? Would it not? Let's have a think. And then you can pick the ones that actually we can try. And it's about getting kids to try new things, because actually trying new things will help overcome their anxiety. And we know that anxiety goes right up and then it comes down. And if you can hold past the peak of the anxiety, it will improve. Those feelings will go. They don't last forever. So it's about just thinking about what we can do there. So we talk about grounding techniques quite a lot. These are some ideas that we've come up with. So actually, when you're out and about, things like, what can you see? What's around you? Because what you're doing then is you're shifting the focus away from what they're worried about onto what they can see. So you're using a different sense. So what can you smell? What colours can you see? Might get them to do the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 scenario, which is tell me 5 things you can see, 4 things that you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. Because again, then you're switching that part of the brain from being the anxious into the thinking. by completely diverting and using senses. We've got box breathing, which I'll talk about in a minute. Thinking about colours, get them to count colours of cars. You know, how many red cars can you see? How many blue, blue shop door fronts or something? If they're okay with dogs, how many dogs can we see on our drive home from school? I want you to count them out every time you see a dog. The banana car game, how many yellow cars, is one that me and my family used to play a lot. And you had to shout banana every time you saw a yellow car, but it stopped us thinking about how long our journey was. Things like that. Shapes, getting them to count. So again, you're just changing the focus of the attention. And the A to Z of animals, or food, or places, depending on what you know. So get them to think about, can they think of a thing beginning with A, B, C, D, and see how far through the alphabet you can get. Because again, if you're doing that on the way to school or something, you're changing the focus of the work and the way the brain is working. Another one I really like, sadly it's not including hot chocolate, but it's again a way, so you hold out your hands in front of you and you take a long deep breath in and imagine you're smelling the hot chocolate, and then breathe out. So you're focusing your breath in a regulated way. And if children have got a really good imagination, which most of them can, they'll start telling you, well, my chocolate's got marshmallows on and cream. And, they start actually getting into the scenario. But actually what they're doing is they're regulating their breathing, which again will then help reduce that levels of anxiety. The breathing technique that I probably use the most with children that I work with is square breathing. Everywhere you go, there is something that is square. It could be the shape of a car is roughly square, doors, windows, desks. There's square shapes everywhere. And all you do, rather than worrying about counting, is you just imagine breathing up one side, out the other, and down and round. So you're not counting to 4, you're not counting to 7, you're just going round and round in a calming, similar pattern. And again, that will help bring your breathing down. So for me, earlier on, I was kind of using the window at the back, because actually these are things that I've taken on and used myself and find that they work. But just that breathing is one of the fastest ways to help regulate ourselves. It's why people smoke as adults. So we think about the technique of smoking. You breathe in, you breathe out. It's a way of regulating. If we can teach children better ways, but going around squares, smoking is not good, then actually we're still giving them that same, it's the breathing, But it is why people tend to smoke more when they're anxious or when something bad's happened. You'll see people outside hospitals, chugging away underneath the no smoking signs. But actually what people are doing is they're regulating their own internal anxieties and worries and feeling through breathing. But as adults, it tends to often be more that. This is not the greatest picture. For some reason, it's come out really blurry. But there's day-to-day things we can do. So it can be things like exercise. Exercise is a great way of managing anxiety. So things like good stretching, meditating, practicing gratitude. So when children come in from school, tell me 3 things that were good about today. Tell me 3 things that went well. Because actually, if you can start focusing on the positives, then they're going to not, we're all very good at focusing on what went wrong rather than what went right. So if we can model that and get them to think about what's gone well, that's a different scenario. Taking a nap. For some people, they just need to shut down, and actually that's okay. And lots of things like, going off, playing with friends, getting outside. Being outside in nature is great. Climbing, exercise, parks, anything like that you can do on your way home from school. So we also talk about sleep hygiene, because actually this is something that can impact on day-to-day, particularly the next day. So it's about kind of doing some things like relaxation before bed, keeping good sleep routines. Kids are on tech quite a lot of the time, and what we found is that actually if you use the blue light setting, and I know they've got them on an iPhone, I presume they have on an Android, but actually if you switch that off, you're not getting the same stimulation. So actually if children are going to be using their devices before bed, which we know they do, get them to switch that off, because actually that will make a difference. Ideally, you want them not to be using it, but we know that that's a reality that's not very likely. Only using your bedroom for sleeping. So actually your body will then adjust to knowing that when you go to bed, that's what you do is you sleep. So not using bedrooms for things like time out, because then they're starting to associate their bedrooms with other things that are not so helpful. Limiting caffeine before bed. So I don't know if any tea, coffee, my niece loves a tea. She's only 6. But things like energy drinks, you know, Monster, Red Bull, those kind of things, if you've got slightly older children, try and cut those down before bed because it will just send them off and not help with the sleep. So there's a few other sort of strategies and things up there. So there's some really helpful books out there. I mean, there are hundreds, but these are ones that we kind of suggest parents have a look at. The Overcoming Your Child's Fears and Worries is the book that we suggest parents buy when they come and do our sort of longer course. And that's a really useful guide. It's written in a very parent-friendly way, but we can also work alongside. So like they were saying earlier with the IY that's been introduced, The Incredible Years, Cathy Cresswell, who writes this book, it brings in a lot of the IY strategies. So you can read that without having to do the, ideally you do it in conjunction with, but it's a really useful book if you're not able to do that. And then, you know, the other ones are sort of slightly more aimed at younger children there, but they're really good because they talk through worries and anxieties in a child-friendly way. But Sarah put in the Overcoming one just because for parents that's the book we find most helpful to kind of signpost to. So, I'm 5 minutes early.
That's okay, you can have more questions.
Okay.